everyone. I'm Jared. It's great to meet you all. I'm sorry that I couldn't be there in person. It's really awkward talking to a whole room of you on Zoom. Am I just on like a giant TV screen on the wall somewhere? Like, okay, like.
I don't know if you can see.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Well, there's giant Jared on the wall there.
All right, we can get started with the first one. So you frequently emphasize that founders should not start building their products until they have evaluated their idea. Similarly, at Launchpad, the first couple of months of our incubator are focused solely on validation. However, this concept of validating an idea before jumping into it is quite new and foreign to high schoolers. Can you please talk about the importance of validation? And do you have any examples of Y Combinator companies that have validated their ideas well or poorly?
Well, the thing is, it depends on what your idea is. It depends on who it's for. There's basically two kinds of startup ideas. The first kind is you're building a thing that you yourself want. And the second kind is you're building something that you think other people want. If you're building the kind of thing where you yourself want it, you actually don't need much validation because you know you want it. That's actually the most important validation, is you're solving your own problem. And sort of everything after that is gravy. Like if you are building it for yourself and you have a reasonable basis for believing that there are a lot of other people like you who would want the same thing that you want, then basically you've already validated it. The place where you need validation is if you're building something that you yourself want, and even worse, that you yourself maybe don't know very much about, then you really need to validate it, because otherwise, who knows if the people that you hope want it actually want it. Yeah.
Thank you so much for that insight. So our next question is, we always say entrepreneurs fall in love with the problem and not the solution. Could you please elaborate on SISPs, or a solution in search of a problem? And what are a couple of examples of SISPs, and how do you help founders refocus on the problem?
Yeah, solution in search of a problem. It's good that you guys are learning this young. Young founders are particularly susceptible to solutions in search of problems. Well, here's a good example of a solution in search of a problem that will be relevant to all of you because you're all in school. You all probably haven't heard of a company called Segment, but Segment is a YC company from a few years ago, and it ended up turning into a very successful company. It got bought for $3 billion, so that's pretty cool. Hopefully, you all will start companies to get bought for $3 billion. But Segment has an interesting history because when it started, it was a definite solution in search of a problem. I'll tell you what the original idea for Segment was. The original idea for Segment, this is the idea that they applied to YC with, was this. They were trying to solve the problem of people getting confused, of students getting confused in classes. And so their idea for how to solve this was that during class, all the students would be on a website, like on their laptop. And if they were confused about what the instructor was saying, there would be a button on the website that said, "I'm confused." And they'd click the "I'm confused" button. And if enough people clicked the "I'm confused" button, like a flashing light would go off for the instructor, and they go, "Oh, they're confused. I better explain this more." This was definitely a solution in search of a problem. And this is also a good example of why validation is important for certain classes of ideas. This was a class of idea where the Segment founders thought that they understood this because they were students. But what they didn't understand initially is that it's not actually students. The student is not the customer. The professor is actually the customer. The school is actually the customer for educational software. And I wouldn't be surprised if some of you are also thinking of educational software ideas. Raise your hand if you're thinking about doing an idea that's like something educational, something related to school. Okay, so for all of you who have your hands raised, one of the things that's most important if you're building educational software is to think carefully about who are the different, like who is actually the customer. Is it the student? Is it the teacher? Is it the school? Is it some combination of them? And if it's some combination of them, it actually has to work for like all the parties involved, not just one of them. But the reason why Segment is such a solution in search of a problem, I mean, you all can probably tell that this idea is just stupid. The reason it's stupid, of course, is that if all the students have a laptop open to a website, they're not going to be looking at the website with the "I'm confused" button. They're going to be like browsing Instagram, right? So It's going to create a problem rather than solve it.
So the next question is, in reason 4 of bad reasons to reject startup ideas, you mentioned that the ideal situation is to enter a space with existing competitors where you've noticed something that they have all missed. How do you develop a key insight, and what are some examples of key insights you've seen at YC?
Sure. Is anyone a user of Dropbox? The file storage thing? Okay, a few people. Does anyone know the founding story of Dropbox, how it got started? So Dropbox was started by founders not that much older than you. They were 22. It was 2 MIT undergrads, Drew and Arash. And if you don't know Dropbox, it's like a file storage and syncing product. You can back up your files to the cloud on Dropbox. And today Dropbox is like pretty dominant in that space. It's basically Dropbox and Google Drive have split the space between them. But an interesting thing about Dropbox is that when Dropbox launched, it was not the first file storage and syncing product. There were in fact something like 20 or 30 file storage and syncing products that already exist, including a bunch that were pretty big and had been around for a long time. And so a lot of founders would have looked at this space and been like, well, it's too late. There's lots of file storage and syncing stuff. Like, I should go work on something else. The space is too competitive. And an insight that Drew, the founder, had was he realized that even though there were a lot of file storage and syncing products, most people didn't use any of them. If you went around and you asked like a room full of students at MIT, because he was an MIT undergrad, most of them didn't use any of these file storage products. And that to him was a big like tip that even though there were a lot of people who were working on this problem, no one had cracked it yet. Because if people had cracked it, everybody would be using one of them, right? And the other big tip off that he had was that he didn't use any of them. And he wanted a way to back up his files, but he actually didn't use any of the existing products. And so that kind of goes back to what I was saying earlier about if you're building something for yourself, it's a lot easier to validate whether it's a good idea. And so Drew started thinking about why people didn't use it, and he ended up with a very specific insight about what everyone else was missing. And the thing that everyone else was missing, I'll describe it like in short form. Essentially, in the original version, all the first 30 file syncing systems, they all worked the same way. You basically had to go to a website and you had to upload your files one at a time. And if you have a lot of files, that kind of sucks, right? And so what Drew realized is that what no one had built yet was something that just like automatically just like syncs your entire hard drive to the cloud. No one had built that yet. And that was basically what Dropbox was. It was just like one click, you install this thing on your laptop, and then boom, everything is backed up to the cloud, and you never have to think about it ever again. And no one had built that. And so there's different ways to think about what are the competitors to an idea. If you think about the competitors to the idea, anything that's like cloud file storage, and there were lots of competitors, but if you think about who had actually built the specific product he was envisioning, there wasn't any competition.
Our next question is, in your list of mistakes that founders make, the first is believing you need an amazing idea, which I guess you just touched on. You talk about how you need a good enough idea combined with great execution. As high schoolers, what do you think is the best way to become better executors?
Well, hopefully that's what you're going to learn at Launchpad. Like the beauty of this thing that you all are doing is basically you're going to get to practice what it's actually like to execute on a startup idea. By the time you get to college, you're going to be way ahead of the other people who have maybe like read books about startups and, you know, watched The Social Network and stuff, but they've never actually tried it themselves. You all are going to actually do it. And that's the best way to learn.
Next up, we have Elise.
Hello. I'm Elise, and I'm here today to pitch the idea of Seed, which is it helps to address the problem, the prevailing problem in many high schools is that high schoolers graduate, like millions of high schoolers graduate every year with little understanding of financial literacies and what the financial sector can do to help themselves and their personal gains. And what I'd like to pitch is what I coined the Duolingo for financial literacy. So it's a subscriptional app where you log in every day for maybe 10 minutes to just just complete lessons and later apply it to a simulator before eventually building up to applying it to the stock market and other like real world scenarios. And while 10 minutes a day may seem insignificant at first, it actually builds up to more than 60 hours per year of just learning about financial literacy and how to become financially independent in the future. And my aim is through this startup is to create a balance between application as well as learning. And a main differentiation from others companies or startups that do this is that I'd like to focus on investing with impact and investing with change, because newer generations are increasingly finding themselves wanting to contribute to social issues and like cause change in their communities. And so the target market is teens between 13 and 20. So this would encompass people from middle school, high school to college. And my unfair advantage is that because I'm a current high schooler at a very well-connected school, I have I have resources from other students who can give feedback about the startup as well as potential customers. And my original idea for starting this is because I'm very I'd say that I'm pretty involved with investing and business clubs on campus. However, I found that a lot of them are not very beginner friendly. And I'm hoping that Seed will be an approachable as well as beginner friendly app.
Nice. That was a great pitch. Okay. One thing that was good about this pitch for everybody is I really understand what she is planning to work on. Like I understand the idea. I can almost picture what the app would look like in my head. A great startup pitch creates a clear image in your own mind of what the person is planning to build without them having to show you like a screenshot of the app. So that was a very clear, very well articulated description. So that's very good. The other thing that I really like about this startup idea is that your potential users are literally sitting in the same room. They're all the people who are who are looking at you right now. And so if you can get those people to be intellectually honest with you about whether they actually want the thing that you are building or not, you will quickly learn whether you are building the right thing. Because if they use it and they buy it, then you're really onto something. And if they don't, then something is off and you need to change something about your idea. If you're building a product and your users like don't live on campus, they're like, you know, they're like in some far off place. It's much easier to delude yourself for a long time that you're making something people want. It's very hard when like you eat lunch with them.
Well, thank you.
Cool.
Thank you. Next, we have Ethan.
All right, so hi, I'm Ethan, and my idea name is called Explorex. And so the problem that I'm facing is that a lot of students, when researching, they have to spend a lot of time because researching takes a lot of effort. Then my solution to this is a web browser extension in the form of AI that can streamline text-heavy documents and articles. And then basically the business model for this is subscription-based, and the target market is mostly high schoolers and students as well. And then my unfair advantage is that, one, I've spent a lot of time working with AI, as well as having worked with a lot of PhDs at Stanford and many other universities who focus solely on AI. And then the third and one of the most important ones is that I'm surrounded by high school students as well. And so I'm able to test and able to observe how my product will work with them.
So unlike the last one, I'm having a little trouble picturing exactly what you're planning to build. Can you help us all picture how this product would actually look?
So if you think about it, you can think about it almost as like Grammarly Premium, or just Grammarly in general, right? You think of Grammarly, you can see a little pop-up button on like a Google Doc or a document of sorts. And then this is basically in the same general area where, similar to like ChatGPT, right? You can put in a prompt in a text box, or whatever assignment or project you have. and it'll give you a line of data, a line of sources, citations, any sort of that. Similar to where Grammarly, like you can have a little button that you can press on your document or any sort of like word.
Hmm. Can you give a specific example of a situation where you think this would be useful?
So for instance, like you can have a student who has maybe a 10-page, PDF or textbook to read, right? And they don't, for example, they don't have the time to finish it. They don't have the time to read through every single page to find the exact information that they need for maybe a research paper or for, a lab, any sort of that kind of stuff. And so the best way is that you can basically ask your bot or your AI for what exactly you are searching for, whether it's data XYZ, does oil field XYZ do this, or what are the documents or dates for a certain event, right? And then it'll give you the exact dates as well. It'll give you citations, what page, what paragraph it is on. This way that if you really do need to find out more, you can always go back to the exact page and find out what it is that you're missing, right?
Yeah. Okay. I think I've got a clearer understanding now. One thing that's cool about this idea is you could start by just signing up the other students at school and getting them to use it. But if they actually like it and use it, then this is not specifically a tool for students. This is a tool that could be used by like anyone for a very broad array of purposes, right? Your parents could use this at work. I mean, there's like a million use cases. And so this is something which could start with a narrower market, which is like, let me build something that other high school students want. But then if it works, it's a horizontal idea, we call it. It could expand into all kinds of areas. There's another thing that's kind of cool about this idea. Who here has heard of what we call in startup business a why now? Have you heard this phrase, why now? So this is one of the heuristics that people who work in the startup industry use to try to figure out what startup ideas are likely to be promising. And it goes like this. Most of the best startup ideas have a clear why now. And what I mean by a why now is there is a good reason why, if this is such a great idea, it doesn't already exist. Because if you have an idea and you're like, this is the best idea ever, you got to ask yourself, why didn't somebody build it 10 years ago? Like, why doesn't this thing already exist today? And a very good common reason is like the technology to build it didn't exist yet. So Ethan, I assume you're planning to build this on top of ChatGPT or
almost like a basis. It's a little bit separate, but it's stemming from the idea of OpenAI and ChatGPT.
It's a little bit different. So how are you planning to build
it? So I've already done like a bunch of research with ChatGPT and like prompt engineering and things like that, where basically based on the prompt you ask, it'll give you specific data and whatnot. So I think probably, yes, you use maybe like the API of OpenAI and ChatGPT to help you build upon this AI. But then I think the best solution would probably be to integrate already like existing, like certain like structures or like prompts that you can already use. For example, like I have a whole document full of different kinds of prompts that you use specifically for extracting certain types of data. And so I think the best way is like you can repeatedly do these prompts over and over again to train your model to recognize different types of instructions or assignments or projects and whatnot.
That's cool. Well, regardless, there's a very like interesting why now here, which is basically the technology that you're building all of this stuff on. It didn't exist until pretty recently. And so that's a good reason why this doesn't already exist and why there might be a big new opportunity that has been created in the world that you get to go take advantage of. Very cool.
Thank you so much. And finally, we have Nikki.
Hi, my name's Nikki. I'm a freshman here, and my idea name is 6 Degrees. So the problem that I'm trying to solve here is that, in today's day and age, it's so easy to find someone's contact info and reach out with an impersonal email that basically everybody does it. But sometimes to get somewhere, you need like a more personal connection or a more personal touch. So basically, you need a network to get to somebody. So enter 6 Degrees. It's an auto networking app that syncs all your connections, friends, and followers on LinkedIn, X, Instagram, Facebook, and more. And basically, it'll find sort of like the shortest friend chain across all the platforms to get to people you want to contact. Basically, it's an auto network. So the business model, I think it should probably work as like a standard monthly subscription model or something. And the potential market for this is huge. Like, for example, young people are looking for jobs, people are applying to colleges. And also sometimes you just kind of need something to get done, like home improvements or a specialized doctor's appointment. And so why me? Like, what's my secret advantage? Well, it's because I'm here. So Andover is a great place to start this up because one, people here, like, we're all looking to move up in the world and to get places. But two, also some people here have some pretty good connections. So there's a lot of opportunity for like interactions on the platform and usage. And so I guess in closing, it's like an idea that like relatively seemingly straightforward to create and execute. It solves a pretty big problem, and I think it has a lot of potential. So
That's very cool. It's a very sophisticated idea. How did you end up finding this idea?
well, I was thinking about my startup idea for a while, and I honestly don't remember what else I came up with, but I was thinking that like people like a lot of them were kind of niche. So I started thinking, okay, I'll leave this alone. And if I ever think of a problem, I'll be like, wait, I'm looking for a startup idea. Can I solve this with, maybe some sort of idea or whatever? And one day I was thinking, man, it would be awesome if like sometime in the future I was able to contact this and this person for college. And I was like, wait, people here probably have the same problem. Like a lot of people have this idea. So that's kind of how I came up with it. The solution was pretty straightforward from there.
That's cool. So I think there's a great lesson in here for everyone. Earlier we talked about like, oh, how do you come up with startup ideas? And the interesting thing here is first, if I'm understanding correctly, you sat down and you tried to think of startup ideas and you kind of didn't really come up with anything good. So you're like, okay, well, that didn't work. What if I just am patient and I try to observe what are the problems in my life that might be solvable with a new startup? And maybe over the course of the coming weeks, I'll run into a problem and I will notice that that could be a startup opportunity. And that is actually how you like came across the startup idea. And there's a very deep truth in what Nikki just said, which is that is actually how most of the great startup ideas came to be. They were not created by somebody sitting down and being like, okay, from 4 to 5 p.m. today, I'm going to think about startup ideas. And then like out of that, a great startup idea came. That's actually pretty rare. Most of the great startup ideas came the way Nikki's came, which is the founders noticed that there was a problem in their life. And the reason that other people noticed that problem and didn't start the company, but because they had mentally like prepared themselves to be in a position to notice good startup ideas as they came across them in life, they actually realized that they could not just solve this problem, but they could actually build a product that solved it for other people. Yeah.
Do you have any like questions or like criticisms of the idea or things that I could do better?
Well, one of the things is, unlike some of the other ideas, this might be a little bit trickier to get users from the people in this room. And so you might have to work a bit harder to basically find the people who want this. I suspect that the core audience for this might be people who are a little bit older than you. Yeah. And so you might start thinking this might be an idea that you might start talking to other people about earlier in the sort of idea validation phase. And you also said something interesting, which is it seemed to you like it was pretty straightforward to build. I'm impressed. I'm impressed that you think this is going to be easy to build because it sounds pretty hard to me. Are you going to crawl all of these social networks and like ingest all of their data?
Probably it's not going to be easy.
Yeah.
Not a computer science person, so
Yeah. Well, anyway, you might team up with a computer science person and think
I
through.
have to.
Okay. Think through what the MVP actually is, because I can imagine that the version that you have in your head that like works for all social networks in all cases, that might not be a real MVP. That might be like something that takes a lot that's not practical to do in a semester. And you basically have to scope it down and come up with like a smaller place to start that's actually tractable to do in a few months.
All right, thank you.
All right. Thank you so much for providing feedback to all of those startups ideas. We really, really appreciate it. And I think the final thing would just be a Q&A. If anyone has any questions, should you just raise your hand?
As recipe number 1 for generating startup ideas states, start with something you're especially good at. What are some examples of unfair advantages high schoolers might have?
Well, a really cool advantage that high schoolers and young founders in general have is they get to approach all problems from like a fresh start. There's a lot of things in the world that like have been built by like people who came before you. And if I try to start a startup now, my mind is going to be limited because I know about all of these things. I know all the history of startup ideas that have been tried and have worked or haven't worked. And I know all the stuff about industries and all this like conventional knowledge about like what makes a good startup idea. And both the great advantage and great disadvantage of young founders is that they don't know all that stuff. They don't have it like clouding their brains. And this causes two seemingly contradictory, but not actually contradictory things to be true. Young founders, when they do startups, their startups are more likely to fail. Like they're more likely to not go anywhere. And this is because they don't know a bunch of stuff. And so they're more likely to like make like dumb mistakes that a more experienced person like would never try. But here's the other thing that is true, which is that when young founders, when their startups succeed, they are more likely to build a truly like world-changing multi-billion-dollar company than when experienced founders start their companies. And that's why a lot of the household name products that you guys know of, you know, things like Facebook, were started by really young founders who didn't know any better, that like that wasn't how you were supposed to do it. And so in cases where the conventional wisdom is wrong, young founders have a huge advantage because they're very likely to just like blunder into something that like everybody else has overlooked. So that could be one place to look if you want to try something really ambitious, is to look for places where the conventional wisdom might be wrong.
Definitely. Oh, we have a question.
You wanna come up as well?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then we also have another question after that.
My question is, at Y Combinator, what's your process for taking someone who has an idea and like turning that person into someone who just has an idea into someone who can actually start a company?
Well, first off, I should show you where I am. I don't know if you guys can see that well, but here I am. I'm at Y Combinator, not just virtually, but physically. This is Y Combinator.
Whoa.
Do you guys want a quick tour?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. I'll give you all a quick tour. This is Y Combinator. It's empty today. We don't have any fans, but during the Y Combinator batch, this room that I'm in would be filled with chairs and people. And this is a little stage that we have. This is where we have speakers come and speak every night during the batch. Let's see. And then this room that I'm in, this is one of our group office hour rooms. So all batch long, we do these things called group office hours, where we meet with small groups of founders to talk about their startups and how they're going. And to answer your question, how do we take people who have an idea and turn them into startup founders? I don't know that we do, actually. I actually think that what we do is we take people who already have the skills to be startup founders, and we give them just enough like confidence to actually go and do it for real. What are the skills to be startup founders? This is a good question for you all, because if there's one thing to get out of this Launchpad program, I think it would be like to develop some of those skills. And like the skills that people basically need to come in with are they need to know how to build stuff. So if you don't know how to program, you should learn how to program, because like high school is a perfect time to learn how to program. I learned how to program when I was in high school, so who all can too. It's like building stuff and launching it, learning how to actually build your own thing and launch it to the world and get users, learning how to put up a website, buy a domain name, get a website hosted on the public internet, release an app to the app store. There's a lot of like block and tackle skills of actually just like putting something out and being public about it. That's like a really valuable skill to learn. And then talking to users and getting users, figuring out how to basically promote a thing that you build and get people to know about it, how to get people to care, how to talk to users, how to understand if they want what you're building or not. How to get over the fear of talking to strangers, how to get over the emotional fear of rejection, of somebody telling you that your idea is bad, that they don't want it, that they're not going to pay for it. Those are like incredibly valuable life lessons that you all can learn over the next year.
It's great to meet you. My question is, how many iterations do you see? How many iterations does it usually take before you find a successful business idea? And for your personal startup, how many iterations did it take you?
Yeah, how many ideas do you go through? I went through about 7 ideas for mine. That was a lot. I mean, I would say especially for young founders, like often several. And sometimes it's several ideas as part of the same conceptual company, which is like the same set of people working together and they're sort of like churning through ideas. Sometimes it's like multiple companies. Like sometimes it's like people try something with one person, just kind of doesn't go anywhere, and then they give up and they, go back to focusing on school, and then like a year later they try again with somebody else, and like it requires a different incarnation of the team and the group of people in order to find stuff. But it often takes like quite some time to find something that's really good. And so I think like a meta piece of advice that I would have for all of you is like, if you're struggling to find a startup idea for this program, like don't sweat it. Just like settle for an idea that seems sufficiently good that it will enable you to actually practice the other stuff, to actually build something, launch it, get users, like try all of the things, and something that you think would be fun to build. That would be like a great outcome, I think, for folks in this program, because then you'll come away having actually learned a lot. Sometimes I see with young founders, they basically get stuck at the idea stage. They're just like, I don't have a great idea. I need a great idea in order to move forward. And they don't have any great ideas. And so they just like kind of get stuck. Versus the founders that actually succeed, they tend to have more of a mentality of they're just going to throw stuff at the wall and see what sticks. And they're not going to be too analytical about trying to figure out really early on, like whether something's a $1 billion startup idea.
Hi, my question was, how do you make sure that startup ideas that address like finite like problems or contemporary problems are sustainable in the long term?
Do you have an example?
Just like, I don't know, like startups that like address like current events, for example. Like how would that like sustain itself in the long term?
Oh, like if you want to do something to like help like the war effort in Ukraine or something, and you're just like, well, what
Yeah,
happens
for
if there's
example.
no war in Ukraine? Yeah, I think those are tricky, honestly. Like, I mean, for some of them, you can imagine how they would, be useful in like future current events that are comparable to that. But some of those probably don't make great long-term startup ideas because they, yeah, for exactly the reason that you said. But this could be actually a great opportunity for all of you. For the purposes of this class, because the thing is, if you run a company, like, like a real company, like a startup, like Dropbox or something, like Stripe or something, you actually don't really want to work on time limited opportunities, because you have to spend all this effort. You like take a team of people off of your core product, you put them on this like thing, and then like, who knows how long it's going to last. And when it's over, now all that work is basically like useless. And so there's a lot of products that the world often needs around current events. The pandemic was one of these. Often like conflicts, natural disasters. There's like a whole bunch of current eventy kinds of things that happen that often the world is crying out for a software product, and existing companies are not actually set up to provide one-off software products for current events. It doesn't work structurally for them. But it can actually be a great opportunity for students. And like during the pandemic, for example, a lot of young founders built really cool software products that were super useful during COVID. And they didn't probably turn into billion-dollar companies, but they were super useful and a really great way for the people who worked on them to get some real-world experience of what it'd be like to do real start.
As I was reading through the new batch of Y Combinator startups, I noticed a lot of them had like AI as their tagline, or like it's sort of become a buzzword that a lot of people are using. So I wanted to know how you can differentiate between like what makes an AI startup like actually doable and practical, and when you guys are evaluating like those ideas, what's your process? Thank you.
Yeah. So he's right that a lot of the companies in the most recent YC batch were AI startups. But I would argue that there's a good reason for that, that it is not just, I don't know, YC like falling for the hype or something like that, like you might hear on the internet. What's actually going on there goes back to what we were talking about earlier about why now, which is that most good startup ideas have a why now. And for all the AI startups, basically the why now was that large language models and diffusion models were invented in the last year or commercialized in the last year. And now it's possible to build a whole bunch of software products that literally could not have been built a year ago. And that is a very powerful, very deep and fundamental like change in the world. And if you're the kind of person that is on the lookout for a great startup idea, that is a big deal for you. And so to answer your question of like, how do I tell whether something is an AI startup? Well, I don't know, like the term AI is not like licensed or whatever, but what we look for when we're trying to figure out whether a startup idea is really interesting is we look at, is there a good why now? We look at, has something changed about the world that made this thing suddenly possible? That I think will enable you to distinguish between startup ideas where AI is actually like at the core foundation of like what makes the idea versus things where people like had a startup idea, but then they wanted to involve AI somehow. And so they sort of like grafted it on.
I see. Thank you so much.
Hi, my name's Severe. I'm like a junior or my third year here. And my question was based off like exits. So when looking at like the profile of Y Combinator, these numbers are based off CrunchLab, by the way. So I'm not sure, or Crunchbase, I'm not sure how accurate they are. But I saw like you guys almost have 6,000 investments, but around like 500 exits. But on your personal profile, you have like almost a very different ratio. Like you have half the number of exits as like investments. So how do you determine your personal like exits? Do you use a similar set of parameters that you use when judging a like company to invest in, or is it like completely different? Like, what is your personal like process, or is it like an extremely different thing?
You seem like somebody that has been interested in investing. Well, the thing I would say, since you seem like you're interested in learning about investing and how it works, the thing I would say is that the important KPI for investors is not the percentage of companies that exit or the ratio, which is like a ratio of exits to investments, right? That is actually like, it might sound like an important number, but it is actually not an important number. And the reason is that exits are plotted on an exponential curve. They are not equal to each other or even close to each other. Some exits are like Airbnb, which is like $100 billion exit. And some exits are like a little acqui-hire that's actually like $0. And so when investors look at this, they actually don't care about the percentage of their investments that exit. What they care about is how many exits they have that are really big and meaningful. And so it's true that, yeah, that's what I would say is like, I don't really think it's an important number to track. And this is sort of a meta lesson that might tie this question back to what other folks are working on here. One of the things we talk about a lot at YC are KPIs. Everybody know what a KPI is? It's like a fancy term from Silicon Valley. It stands for key performance indicator. And it's basically what numbers are you keeping track of to know whether your thing is working or not. So if your if you're the guy who's building the Chrome extension to answer questions about the documents that you're reading, is that Ethan?
Yeah.
Yeah. So if you're Ethan, like, what are the metrics? What numbers are you tracking to know whether your project is succeeding or not? And it's super important to actually choose the right numbers, where when the number goes up, the thing is actually working better. Because if you choose the wrong number, you can easily end up in a situation which the number keeps going up, but actually the thing is not working at all. So for example, in Ethan's case, a very plausible number that a lot of people might choose would be how many people installed his Chrome extension. Might seem, okay, more installs equals better. But actually, I would argue that would be a bad number to track, because if a bunch of people install the Chrome extension and don't use it, then that means that it's actually not working. And so instead, a better number to track would be what we call weekly active users, which are like how many people are actually using the Chrome extension on a weekly basis. And so just like startup founders, investors all have KPIs, and we spend a lot of time thinking about our KPIs and making sure that we're choosing the right numbers. Sorry, I was just going to say, it's great meeting you all. These were great questions. I'm very impressed with the folks who I talked to. You all are very sophisticated for still being in high school. And I think what you're doing here with Launchpad is super cool. And I'm really excited to see that the folks here have organized this program and created it. And I think it's really awesome.
Thank you. Thank you so much for your time. We deeply appreciate it. We can't believe that like all of 4 pitchers have gotten like personalized feedback from you. It's just such an honor.
Sure thing, guys. All right. Good luck.